had an ultrasound, and I remember the dates. I remember them saying that he's small, that he wasn't getting what he needed, and that he wasn't growing. So all that fluid that I had in my hands and in my legs and in my feet and my face, I had nowhere to go but my lungs. So I started to drown, and that's why I couldn't breathe. And she said, that's the end game. There's nothing we can do. They started to tell us about his survival rate, and then they asked me how I wanted to give birth. And at the time, so after they said I was drowning, I thought I was going to be brought to like the birth suite, but instead it was a lot more serious than I thought. And I ended up being in the ICU. I couldn't believe that I was placed in that ward. They gave me the oxygen that helps you breathe, and I had to have that placed in. When I first got there, I remember I had a really close friend of ours, he was like an uncle, come by to see how I was doing. And they flushed me with the magnesium, but they gave me like a lot of magnesium. And I remember feeling my whole body just, it felt like it was in my veins. It just lit up with like fire. It was so hot. And instead of calling for a nurse, I was calling for Sam, saying I was gonna throw up. And I remember he had like a little ice tray, and he put the ice tray in front of me. But then the nurse quickly ran over and gave me like a proper bucket, and I threw up so much. Like my poor uncle, who just came to see how I was doing in the ICU, just walked into me throwing up my guts and crying. Oh, it was horrible. And in the rooms before, Sam was able to sleep beside me. The very first night we were in the hospital, actually, he was sleeping on like a gym mat on the floor. And then he moved to like those uncomfortable couches on the side. But in the ICU, he couldn't stay with me. But he stayed with me until I fell asleep for all the nights that he wasn't allowed to be with me. I remember having a nurse come in with a heartbeat thing, and she asked if I wanted to hear his heartbeat, like all happy, and I said no. And then I had this other midwife come in, and she asked me what I wanted to happen tomorrow. And I remember crying to her, saying that I didn't want to be in pain anymore. And she said that they can do that. They can give me an epidural, they can give me gas, they can give me whatever I wanted. And then I said that I didn't know. I said I wasn't ready to see him, and that I didn't know how I would handle it. And she told me that I would be surprised because I'd be really strong. And I literally just had like a bunch of random midwives around me just crying with me. I remember waking up throughout the night in the ICU, and I could hear like the nurses like laughing, and they were like, oh, you're winking at me. And I looked over, and I was peeking through the curtain, and there was this man, and he was wrapped from head to toe because he was a fire victim. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak. The only way he could talk to the girls was by winking, and like that's how he had to tell them that he was uncomfortable or he wanted something scratched. And I remember hearing them suck out the fluid from his lungs, and I remember laying there thinking, like, how am I here next to someone who is actually really sick? Like, I didn't think I should be in that room. I didn't feel like I was as bad as the guy next to me who couldn't even move. And then the next day came, and they moved me to my own room in the ICU. And you know, I thought, oh, this is cool, I get my own room this time. But it was just so I could give birth in there. And I had this beautiful midwife called Leanne. She was to induce me and start my labor. And she came up to me and rested her head, like our foreheads were touching, and she was crying and saying how strong I've been. And that day I wanted nothing to do with it. I just tried to sleep most of the day away. Apparently I had people come visit me, I don't remember. So when my labor started going, my body started to react to the drug, which was normal. And I started shivering, and I remember them putting piles of like heated blankets, like heavy heated blankets on top of my body. And I had my mother-in-law like rubbing my legs and rubbing my back, and it just made me feel so much better. And then I remember my contractions started. Contractions suck, like really suck. And fun fact, when you're in labor and you're having contractions, not only is it your muscles tightening, but your bones are literally shifting to make way for your baby. And even though my son was really small and we were having him early, it was exactly like every other labor would be. And it was the first time I ever felt that kind of pain, and it sucked. And they recommended I have the epidural because it was actually very beneficial to me, not only so I didn't feel pain, but it also lowered my blood pressure. And that was one of the risks that they were worried about. They were saying that if my blood pressure gets too high, I'd have to have a C-section, which means I'd never have a baby again. They were saying that if my son got stuck or my placenta got stuck, I'd have to have a C-section. So there were so many complications that could have happened. They tried to give me the epidural, and I remember I didn't want to move. I was in so much pain. And they said, like, you just need to move the
tiniest bit on the bed, and I didn't. I sat there and I just said, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it anymore. And I don't remember what Sam said to me, but it was enough to get me to move. He told me that I was at my breaking point as a person, and I moved up the bed, and then I didn't feel any pain anymore. After I had the epidural, I laid down, Sam went out to get a drink, Mum came in, I remember my water broke, I just felt it pop, and I jumped because I was asleep. Mum was like, are you okay? And then we had the nurses in and she said it's time to push. So I remember Mum was ringing Sam and she's like, get here now, like it's time to push. And I couldn't feel anything. I just remember her telling me when to push. And like the whole time I had it, I was done. And it's crazy because the night before, when me and the midwives were crying together, they told me that I would find strength and I would be strong. And somehow, instead of being strong, I shut my emotions off. I shut everything off. I don't know how I did it. When I gave birth to him, they asked me if I wanted to hold him, and I didn't. And they put him in a blanket and handed him to me, and he wasn't alive, and he was bruised, and I wanted nothing to do with him. I didn't want to hold him. I had Mum crying next to me, and then Sam took him off me, and Sam broke down, and I remember looking at him like, why are you crying? Like, he's not even here. It's not him. We had Sam's family come in, and my stepdad was like down the street, and he was like speeding through all the lights trying to get to us. And you know, they were all like, he's beautiful, he's got my dark hair, he's got Sam's nose. The whole time, whenever it was in here making a big deal, I was like, it's not him, that's not my baby. And I had to put up a front. So they took him away, and we got to move rooms, and I hadn't cried. When I first held him, I didn't cry. When everyone else saw him, I didn't cry. I just couldn't. I didn't feel anything. I felt nothing. I didn't even feel anger. I was just like, I don't know why everyone's upset. When we got to move rooms, we were so exhausted, and I remember Sam was asleep next to me, and I remember laying there, and everything from finding out that we were pregnant to having those symptoms to going to the hospital to being pricked with like 100 needles and having my doctor tell me that she's sorry and we had to give birth, to actually having him, like, it hit me. Everything hit me at once. It wasn't just me realizing that I had a baby, it was everything, and I couldn't breathe. I started to have a panic attack, so I left Sam asleep and I left the room, and I cried for like, I just cried, and I couldn't understand why it happened to me. I couldn't understand why I felt nothing until that second. And I sat there staring out this window, watching the cars drive past, and I was just crying, wishing that I was just in that car, as if it was just, I'm living my normal life, not going through any of this. And I just sat there for hours just crying. And the next day, we had to have a photo shoot of Harley, and my eyes were so swollen. And it's not because I was sick, it was because I spent 3 hours at night crying my eyes out. And bloody hell, I looked horrible in those photos. Everyone was so amazing, and I was still sick. My blood pressure was still high. I had so many more midwives coming in who I never met, and every time I introduced myself to them, they'd tell me that they knew who I was, because the night I came in, they were outside of the room running around trying to save my life. So they dressed Harley in these clothes that these women donate to premature babies, and even the smallest clothes couldn't fit him. There were so many things about those few days that I hated, and that I still hate to this day. I could only spend like a few minutes with him, and every time I asked the nurse to go get Harley, they'd bring him in this bag, and he was just like wrapped up, and he was cold, and I couldn't stand it, because after a while the condensation would be on his face. And one thing that still stays with me is, while everyone around me was picking the baby's first clothes to bring them home in, Sam and I had to pick a coffin for hours. I thought that was really messed up. We had to pick this stupid white little box for for our son, and we decided that we would bring him to the morgue because they were going to transfer him back to where we live, but it's not our hometown, so we decided that he would be buried with Sam's nan, who I was really close with, and that was on the south coast, where he lays to rest now. And we had to think of how we were going to get him there, and we literally had to put him in a freaking like a styrofoam box with fucking ice around him to keep him cold. And that was our first time in the car with him, and he was in the back. And we brought him to the morgue, who happened to be a family friend. And I wanted to see him one more time before I handed this box over. And I couldn't tell you how empty our hands and our hearts felt when we gave him away. We had his funeral a few days later. My stepdad took care of the costs, and my mother-in-law made the most beautiful flowers for him. And I remember the night before we were having dinner, and I had to get up and leave. Like I got up and I apologized and ran straight to my room just to cry. And the next day, the day of his funeral, I felt fine. I felt okay for the first time in a while, until we drove around the corner and saw that stupid gazebo and everyone under it, and I realized that I was going to my son's funeral. I was going to my baby's funeral. So when we gave birth, Harley had the placenta with him, which means that I could have another pregnancy. But after having preeclampsia, I am at high risk. And like 6 months after we lost him, I had an appointment to go get checked up to see how my blood pressure was doing, which I had a few hospital visits afterwards because my blood pressure was still high, that I had to have an ambulance called for me at the doctor's, and I got brought straight to the hospital. And then I remember going back and my blood pressure was too low because of the medication, and again she had to call the hospital, but I said that I was fine. And I went to get my blood pressure taken at the chemist around the corner, and I nearly passed out. And then when we had that appointment, my doctor, who saved my life, couldn't believe what I looked like because she only ever saw me when I was sick. And when I was sick, I had 10 kilos of fluid on my body. So she'd never seen me beforehand, and she couldn't recognize me, like she couldn't believe it. And Sam and I sat there saying we're ready to go again, like we want to try. And she told us that we couldn't, that we'd have to at least wait a year because 1, my body needed to heal, and 2, his due date would be coming up, and we have no idea how that was going to hit us. And I'm actually really, really glad that we waited a year. And that year was, so for all the mums who are going through this or who have been through this, everything you feel is completely normal. Grief has no time limit. You can laugh and you can cry, and that is completely okay. We were told that our next pregnancy could end the same, and it didn't. She came at 37 weeks and 5 days, and that was on her own. And we had a healthy baby girl who is a thriving 2-year-old. So although there's always going to be that emptiness in our heart, we believe that our son gave us Lydia, because if he didn't have that placenta with him, if he got stuck for whatever reason, we wouldn't be able to have another kid. And he and Mother Nature did their thing, and we have her. Preeclampsia is a serious thing, and although my case was very rare, don't ever think that you're whinging or you're making a big deal out of nothing when you're pregnant. If you are concerned, even about the slightest thing, go look into it, call the midwives, bug the midwives, that's what they're there for. And if you ever think that you can't get through something, you can. My son gave me strength that I never knew I needed, and my daughter has given me the will to use it. I'm so sorry that I cried throughout this, and I'm so sorry if I left anyone else in tears, but we're okay. We have had such a traumatizing thing happen to us, but we came out the other side in the end. We went through some of the darkest days, but our daughter has shown us so much light that we make it through every day. and we're happy. The only thing that I struggle with now is not just that we don't have our son or what happened, it's that everyone looks at that time in our life as it is really sad, so they don't want to talk about it. But that is all we have of Harley. That's the only memory we have of him, so it might bring me to tears. And I didn't think this would bring me to tears, like talking to a camera, but I love to talk about him. I want to talk about him. He is my son. He's my firstborn. And I can't stand when people feel like it's so awkward to bring it up. Like, I mean, I completely understand it, but I would give anything to talk about him because I don't have memories past what we went through. I don't have a future with him where I can tell you what he did. All I have is what happened, and that's okay with me. If that means I get to talk about him, that is perfectly fine. So that's our story. It is very real, it is very raw, and it is absolutely heartbreaking, but we made it in the end. And I think preeclampsia really needs to be more known in the world. I think I was like 1 in every 200 that went through what I personally went through, but I managed to pull through, and I want a lot of other women to know that if you were going through something like this, or you have recently been through something like this, it's not going to be easy, but you'll get through. And when you look back on it, it's going to hurt. I mean, a certain song used to set me off in the shops, a certain smell. Anyway, I'm going to close this video out because it is probably like really, really long. Thank you guys for watching. I'm so sorry. I wanted to get this story out there. I wanted people to know what we went through and how it changed our lives and how we went through something so traumatizing, but we ended up okay. And people who could be going through similar things will come out of it in the end. And I also want people to know about preeclampsia because it is so serious. And I was one of those people who didn't know anything about it and brushed all my symptoms off like it was just a normal thing. So another thing with preeclampsia is the quicker you find out that you have it, the quicker you can kind of control it. I mean, you can't necessarily control preeclampsia, but you can hold off as long as you can. So my case was really rare though. I was gone. I was too sick. It was killing me. But you will be okay. And life was never meant to be easy. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I guess you'll see us when you see us. And with a proper smile on our face. Bye.